But our audience didn't get to hear Keith Smith on Wednesday because of the 99 Bottles event. So we asked Keith Smith to join us today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. So we get some little NBA with him. Sixers are back in action tonight and tomorrow night. Knicks tonight, Pacers tomorrow night. So we'll talk some Sixers, a little NBA with Keith. Keith, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
Doing well. So I know that before we get to the Sixers, I know you were keeping track of the Celtics Nets game today. I wanted to ask you about that because it looked like after the game there was a lot of pleasantries between Kyrie and his former teammates, all hugging each other. Lots of long conversations, not the LeBron conversation who puts his shirt over his mouth. No, it was a lot of open dialogue going on there.
Yeah, outside of a couple guys in the NBA, there's no real feuds in this league. Everybody is friends. The guys understand. Players leave, they do what's best for them, and the reason they understand it is because they're going to do the exact same thing when it's their turn. So nobody really holds any ill will towards Kyrie from the Celtics side. They're all going to get along with him just fine, and that's how it's going to go. So no real nothing unexpected there, I guess, with guys sharing pleasantries and saying hello after the game because Kyrie wasn't there last game. So that makes sense that today was the day for that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that gets overlooked is that I think that most of the players realize they're actually better off without Kyrie. Kemba is a much better fit in what the Celtics are trying to do over there, and Jason Tatum is having a good year, and Jaylen Brown is having a very good year. So I think when you look at the Celtics, you could argue that it's almost like an addition by subtraction going on, and for a lot of those people, they probably are like, "Hey, Kyrie, thanks for your year here, but we're happy."
Yeah, I think when it comes down to is something I've been saying all along is in a vacuum, Kyrie Irving's a better player than Kemba Walker. But the reality is fit matters in the NBA, and it matters quite a bit for this Celtics team. They needed a guard who was going to come in, not be ball dominant, was going to be okay with the younger players getting their fair share of shots and things like that. What you're seeing today crop up is how much they miss Gordon Hayward. He was playing at an all-star level when he got hurt. He fractured his left hand, and that's really cost them because they're missing that one guy offensively late in games who can get his own shot or set of teammates. So, but Hayward said this morning he is finally to a point where he feels like he's ahead of schedule. He feels like he's doing really well. He's been able to run. So his conditioning has stayed up. So I think you're going to see it ultimately come down to Hayward getting back here, probably maybe a little ahead of what that timeline was, but right around Christmas. And that's when I think the Celtics will feel pretty good about themselves as they're back as a whole unit once again.
Speaking of fit, I want to switch it over to Sixers because I've been wondering this, Keith, and I don't even know if we have the right answer for this, but I did want to oppose it to you specifically, and that was, we've seen teams that, have added new players to a starting lineup before, take a while to gel and come together. And I'm a little curious, how much do you think the Sixers roller coaster play this year is a byproduct of these guys learning how to play together versus how much are these guys really a fit together?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of learning to play together, partially because you have a lot of guys who want to operate in the same space on the floor because you don't have any true floor spacers. You don't have that J.J. Redick who's going to live around the arc with this team anymore. You're having guys have to play that role, as well as guys like Al Horford and Joel Embiid. They like to operate from the same spot. They both want to be down on the left block on offense, or they want to be up around the top of the key. And unfortunately, when you've got them both, that's just not something you can really make happen. So you can do it, on occasion, and you can mix and match. And I know they haven't played all that many games together yet. So that's, I think, where the fit issues are coming in a little bit. So we'll see ultimately what this looks like with this team. But right now, these guys are just they're having to figure it out. And unfortunately, in the NBA, you got to figure it out on the fly because there's not a lot of downtime. You don't have a lot of days off to practice and things like that. So I think that's why they're getting caught up a little bit.
We have seen some games now with the Sixers where Brett Brown allows his team to figure it out, if you will. He allows the team to just go out there and play their game, and it seems as if there's not an aggressive amount of structure involved. And I was just curious on your thoughts as a whole on Brett Brown and that philosophy with guys like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid who seem to need a little bit more structure.
Yeah, I think you're something on that. They don't run a ton of pick and roll, which is basketball's most simple action. You see just about every team run that multiple times a game, and that's just not a staple for them. So they run a lot of sets. They run a lot of stuff that takes 10, 12 seconds on the shot clock to develop, and if that gets shut down, then they're kind of in trouble because outside of Simmons, they don't really have a lot of guys who can create off the bounce. Josh Richardson can do it a little bit, Horford in the right matchups, Harris from the right spots on the floor, and I think that's kind of causing them a little bit of trouble. What they're lacking is that guy that they can really throw to, the Jimmy Butlers of the world, who last year became the guy, when it breaks down, give me the ball, I'll make something out of nothing, and they just don't really have that kind of guy right now.
So I love Ben Simmons. I need to preface this by saying I do love Ben Simmons. I believe in him, and obviously the jump shot is a problem. But I was just curious, do you think that there's any way that he can be effective off the ball if he is going to be unwilling to shoot? I don't know if that's going to work full-time at point guard, but if you take the ball out of his hands, you're taking away what he is so talented at. So the question is, do you think that he can succeed in this league off the ball a lot more than on the ball?
Yeah, it'd take the right kind of guys to be on the floor with him. When he's out there with Embiid and Horford, one of those two guys needs to be operating in and around the basket area. And that's a problem for Simmons because that's where he's best off the ball. That's about the only place the team's going to guard him. They're not going to stretch it out. I mean, I know he made a three-pointer the other night, but no one's running out on him until he starts knocking those down with regularity. So that becomes a challenge for them where they're just going to have to really kind of figure that out and mix and match, because what you don't want to have is when he gives the ball up, now you're playing 4-on-5. And that's a challenge. The place where I think he could figure it out, and this is where a guy like Horford being such a good passer helps, is if he can figure out his cutting lanes and his cutting angles, that'll work. But the challenge is what you see regularly is he'll give the ball up to Horford or even to Harris or Richardson, then he makes a cut. But he's unfortunately cutting right into Embiid or he's cutting into Horford on the block, and it's just really kind of messing up all the spacing and timing of everything else. So that's something where they've got to really figure that out, because once you get to playoffs, that's all about matchups and schemes. And the minute he gives up the ball, teams are just going to drop a mile away from him and really make them play 4-on-5.
Keith Smith joining us on the World Wakanda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Follow on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA. Keith, I want to ask you also, and this is maybe a little bit too far down the road, but I want to ask you, I know you do a lot of work with salary caps and numbers. We know that teams every year make additions, and what can the Sixers actually do financially to make an addition? Because we know that they signed, Simmons to an extension. They re-signed Tobias Harris to a lot of money. Al Horford's costing a lot of money. It doesn't seem like they're going to have a ton of flexibility to make additions.
Yeah, it's highly unlikely any one of the regular starting five is going to be going anywhere. They're all locked into contract. Simmons is next to impossible to trade this year because of the poison pill provision, which means it counts for a lot more money on one side of the trade than the other. Horford just signed there. You don't generally move guys you just signed. They gave up an awful lot for Harris, re-signed him to a big deal. So that's going to be the tricky part. The guy who I think becomes most tradable of that group is maybe Josh Richardson, because he could help a lot of teams, but I think he helps Philly a lot too, especially on his number. So maybe what you're looking at is they could start piling together some of the contracts with some of their bench guys and putting those guys together in deals and moving them off, and those would be the guys that they would send out in a trade. But other than that, there's really not a clean way, because I don't think this is the year that they're going to look at Simmons and Embiid and splitting them up. Maybe that's an off-season thing. If even then, I think that's probably a little doubtful as well. So I think what you really focus on is buyout seasons, and they're going to look to see who gets bought out, what are their needs. Obviously, they're going to need a shooter or two, and see, does someone free up that was a little unexpected on the buyout market and make a run at a guy like that, because then what they can do is they'll just waive one of the end-of-the-bench guys with no real concern and bring in this guy on the buyout market. But a trade, a little tough to see how that would come together, especially anything that's a real move-the-needle type of deal, because of just the contracts just aren't there to put together to get there.
Keith, one more before we let you go. As the NBA is entering December, I know that we're starting to get close to that deadline. I think it's December 15th, when guys who are signed can then be moved. Is there a prime candidate around the league right now that when that December deadline passes that you foresee might be getting a lot of trade conversation?
What's funny is this is what I do. This is what I talk to people about all the time. And there just isn't. Teams really say it's kind of dead right now. There's the partially what's leading that is the Atlanta Hawks. They're the only team that are under the cap right now. a really poor free agent class, so no one's really trying to clear space for free agency next year. You've got a lot of teams that feel like they're still in the playoff race where they are or aren't really. It's a little early, so I think this year you might see kind of a muted trade market because of the fact of half the league, more than half the league, switched spots last season as free agents. And when that happens, teams are really loath to say, boy, we blew it with this signing. Let's move on from this guy right away. Even when they probably should, they just don't like to do that because it doesn't send a good message to the rest of the league, to the players, to agents, and things like that. So I think you're going to see a trade market that's a little slow to develop. You're probably going to see more action on the buyout market when guys like Andre Iguodala get let go and things like that. You know, maybe a team like the Cavs can move some of their veteran guys, but that's going to be a little bit tough too. So you got to start watching who those bad teams are that fall out right around the holidays, because those are the only teams that are very likely to be active this summer or in season before this summer.
Follow him on Twitter at Keith Smith NBA. He usually joins the Sports Bash every Wednesday at 5:15, but we appreciate him maneuvering around and joining us on a Friday on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Keith, hope you have a great weekend. I will catch you next Wednesday.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Happy Thanksgiving to you and yours.